Hey guys, what's going on? Coming at you from the garage econ classroom, and we're going to look at those long FRQs today. I'm going to be as less wordy than normal. Why? Because there's a lot of them, and let's get them going. I realize that we have done a lot of these FRQs before throughout the semester. I've broken these up into our notes, but I'm assuming for the AP exam you want everything consolidated in one spot. So, bam, here they are. Let's get these going. Number one, assume the economy of Artland is operating above full employment. So what do we know? If we're operating above full employment, that means our short-run equilibrium is greater than our potential. Our QE is greater than our QY. They want us to draw it out for A, so let's draw that puppy out. How do I draw that out? I'm going to make my graphs ugly today because we are in a hurry. Equilibrium is greater. That's half the reason why we're in a hurry today. There's a baby on the prowl. And they want us to label these differently today. They wanted it labeled as Y1 and PL1. Y1, PL1, and they wanted, really? Y1, PL1, baby distractor in there. And this would be the YF, long run aggregate supply, AS, and AD. Cool. That was section A. We're in an inflationary gap. Let's see. Assume the central bank and the government take no policy action to close the output gap. Yikes! They are saying, let the long run happen. All right, whenever no one takes action, we transition to long run. Over here, we are in an inflationary period. So we can assume that in an inflationary period, in the long run, wages and resource prices are going up, right? And we remember aggregate supply is made up of resource prices, actions by government, and productivity. And since we're in an inflationary gap, people are running in there to their boss and yelling, yo, Copo, give me a raise, which means resource prices go up, which is labor, my wage, and whatever intermediate good is going into a resource of production. So if resource prices go up, less can be supplied. So if I'm going to draw that on my graph, I'm going to give it a AS1. It's also kind of there's a hint in here on your graph, show how the economy automatically adjusts in the long run and label the new equilibrium price PL2. So that was kind of a hint right there because they didn't say anything about output. So you know, whenever it's long run, go home, ball, go home. All right, explain the cause of the adjustment showed in part B. Well, that's what we covered right here. The cause was that in an inflationary period, wages and resource prices are going to go up. People are going to want to ask for wages. That way their salary is going to have the same purchasing power as it did before, which decreases aggregate supply and shifts it back. All right. Alternatively, suppose the government wants to close the output gap using fiscal policy. Identify a fiscal policy action that the government could implement to close the gap. Well, if we want to do that, so we're now in an inflationary gap. We'll pretend this didn't happen here. If I want to move my QE to equal my QY, I'm going to have to either cut government spending, that would decrease aggregate demand, or I'd increase taxes. Perfect. That would decrease aggregate demand. So how will the fiscal policy action identified in part C1 affect the unemployment rate? Well, if we are beyond our full employment rate, we have less than our natural rate of unemployment. So if we are going back this way, we are decreasing our employment rate. So our unemployment rate is going to, our employment rate is decreasing. So we're going to increase our unemployment. This is what happens when I rush. What's going to happen to the natural rate of unemployment? Nada. Natural rate of unemployment is always going to stay the same. So I'm going to say nada because that's done by our economy or our society, not by actions by government. So in our economy, we're always 4 to 6% natural rate of unemployment. In closing the output gap, will the automatic adjustment identified in B1 produce a higher, lower, or same price level compared to the fiscal policy identified in C1? Okay, so the automatic, so up here, when this happened, we increased the price level because AS shifted to the right. When aggregate demand, if we show this, AS, AD, long run. When we decreased aggregate demand, we dropped our price level. So the fiscal policy decreased our price level. So D is lower price level. Did they ask us to explain it? No. So it's going to produce a lower price level. Sweet. Draw a correctly labeled graph of the loanable funds market and show the effect of a fiscal policy action identified in part C1. All right. So we had a contractionary fiscal policy, which means we cut government spending and increased taxes. That means we ran a government surplus. That will never happen in real life. Bless our hearts. So what happens there? That means if usually this is the supply of loanable funds and this is the demand of loanable funds, this is our real interest rate, and this is our quantity of loanable funds. If usually that's our equilibrium, you got consumers borrowing money, you got businesses borrowing money, you got government borrowing money, and you got foreigners borrowing money, right? Everybody that could be in our economy. Let's say government is usually borrowing $50 billion as part of this equilibrium. Well, now, because we have a government surplus, the government only needs to borrow $25 billion. So there'll be less demand for loanable funds. So in this case, with less demand for loanable funds, our interest rate should drop. Show the effect identified on the real. Yep, boom, dropped it. So we would probably label this as interest rate equilibrium, and we'd label that one as interest rate 1. All right. Given the interest rate identified in part D, will long-run aggregate supply curve shift to the right, to the left, or remain the same? Okay, so in this one, let's see if I can get this a little higher. I'm going to put it right over here. E, our long-run aggregate supply will actually increase. So if we were sitting somewhere like that, our long-run aggregate supply will go to the right, to an LARS1. Why? Because when interest rates are lower, if we decrease our interest rates, can we see that there? Come on now. If I decrease my interest rates, we can assume that businesses are going to invest in new capital resources. So if this is AS, if businesses invest in more capital goods, aggregate supply, let's just clear that off real quick and start it all the way over from the beginning because I got a little jumpy there. We're going to say that this was our equilibrium. Let's just imagine that AS is here, AD is here, long run is here. Now, if interest rates decrease, that means consumers are going to take out loans and buy themselves consumer goods. So that's going to go up. And businesses are going to increase their investment in capital goods. So in the short run, the first shift that'll happen is that aggregate demand goes to the right. But because businesses are investing in capital resources, and we know that aggregate supply is made up of resource prices, actions by government, and productivity, if they increase their capital stock, they're going to be more productive. I almost said productivity. They're going to be more productive. If they're more productive, that means our new intersection isn't right there. We're going to have an AS1 in the mix too. So AS1 is sitting right there, and our new long-run aggregate supply has shifted to the right. So the explanation there, investment increases for capital goods, that's going to move us to the right, just like it would if it was our PPC curve. We'd be shifting outward because we have increased resources, right? The shifters of the PPC curve was a change in resources, a change in technology, and a change in trade. In this case, this is a change in the quantity of resources in this economy. All right, 2018. All right, so let's get a title on that again. 2018, number 1. The United States is in a recession. Wow, that was not wordy at all. Thank you. So what do I need to draw? Am I doing long run aggregate supply? Yep. So if I'm in a recession, I've got my price level. I have a GDP. I have an AS, I have an AD, I've got a long run aggregate supply chilling right there. They probably want me to label things in a strange way, like Y1 and PL1. And do I have a, did it give me something to label long run aggregate supply? Well, that's sad. I'll just give it a smiley face. Hey. All right. So now let's see. Now assume the Eurozone enters a recession. Okay, so one of our friends enters a recession. What will be the effect on the United States export to the Eurozone? Well, our exports, this is BI, our exports will decrease. Explain? Well, if our friend is in a recession, they're not going to buy our stuff. They're broke, right? They have less income. If they have less income, they're not going to buy our stuff. So our exports will decrease. On our graph, show the effect of the change identified in part 1, our decrease in exports, on real output in the United States. Well, we're in a recession, and now our exports to the Eurozone have decreased. Oh, sad face. We just entered further into a recession. Sweet. What will be the effect of the change identified in part BII on the unemployment in the United States? Well, we went further. When we went over here into Y2 and PL2, we went further into a recession. So this is the third one because the shift there. So our unemployment is going to continue to increase. So our unemployment's going up. Why? We went further into a recession. Part C we don't have to worry about because this is a foreign exchange. This will not be on your exam. Yes. Assume the United States implements a combination of fiscal and monetary policies in the absence of complete crowding out. So that means crowding out won't bring aggregate demand all the way up and all the way back. So which of these follow? What will be the effect of each of these policies aggregate demand in the United States? So anytime you're doing an expansionary monetary or expansionary fiscal, it's always changing aggregate demand. So with D1, aggregate demand will increase, which means it shifts to the right. Every time aggregate demand increases, price level goes up. And let's demonstrate that. We're in a recession. Anytime aggregate demand goes from AD to AD1, price level always goes up, output always goes up. And interest rates in the United States, explain. A combination, so we can't tell what's going to happen with this one. Because remember that cheat sheet I posted? Anytime you do an expansionary fiscal policy, what's the side effect of an expansionary? There it is. The side effect of an expansionary fiscal policy is crowding out, which is an increase in interest rates as a result of a deficit, right? So in fiscal policy, the side effect is crowding out increased interest rates. In monetary policy, the effect of monetary policy, what are we trying to do? We're trying to decrease interest rates because we're trying to encourage consumer and investment spending. We want people to borrow. That way aggregate demand goes up. So if this one is going down and this one is going up, we can't tell which one is going to be greater or less. The monetary policy may have dropped it lower than the side effect of the fiscal policy, or maybe the side effect of the fiscal policy was higher than the effect of the monetary policy. Let's see how a wordy wordsmith would have put that. For number 1D, a point is earned for stating that the change in interest rate is indeterminate and for explaining that the combination of expansionary fiscal and policy have opposite effect on interest rate. So much better words. The expansionary will cause an increase as government, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so yeah, there you go. All right, let's hit number 17. All right. So number one, we've done this one twice, actually. Once back in Phillips curve days, and then once I think we did it with monetary policy, but I can't remember. No, Whatever, let's just do it. Who cares? Short run, Phillips curve. Let's set this one up with long run, Phillips curve. Inflation and unemployment. They're saying that country X has an actual unemployment rate of 7%. So what's happening right now is that we are at 7%, and our natural rate of unemployment was 5%. So 7%, 5%, and the inflation rate was 3%. So A was draw that puppy. B, assume country X takes no policy action to reduce unemployment. Okay, we're going long run again, which means we're messing with aggregate supply. So I'm going to put our AS next to it. So we're in a recession. So same graph right here. Here's our AS, here's our AD. Eventually, if we're in a recession and I used to get paid $100,000 a year, and I haven't worked for 3 months, I'm willing to work for 75 grand, right? So if I am right here at QE, and that's QY, in a recession, long run, so let's put that long run, always relates to aggregate supply. And aggregate supply is based on resource prices, actions by government, and productivity. I'm willing to work for less. My wage, land, labor, capital, and entrepreneur, my labor wage, the resource of production, has gone down in the long has gone down in the long run. So aggregate supply will shift to the right to AS1 and returns us to long run equilibrium. So BI, what will happen to the short run aggregate supply? It's going to increase. And the explanation, in the long run, wages and resource prices are going to respond to the recession. Wages will drop, resource prices will drop, aggregate supply goes to the right. What's going to happen in the long run Phillips curve? Well, the long run Phillips curve is going to stay right where it's at. That's the exact same question they asked up here when they said what is going to happen to our, where was it? To our natural rate of unemployment. Our natural rate of unemployment lives under our long run Phillips curve. So it's just testing to see if you can recognize the exact same thing. So what's going to happen to our long run Phillips curve? A big fat nada. Let's write nothing on the AP exam instead of nada, but nada is more fun. Identify the fiscal policy action that can be taken to reduce unemployment in the short run. All right, if I want to reduce unemployment, I'm in a recession. This is my unemployment happening there. I need to move my aggregate demand to the right. So I need to implement an expansionary fiscal policy. An expansionary fiscal policy includes increasing government spending or cutting taxes. So there's our C. Draw a correctly labeled graph of aggregate demand and the short-run aggregate supply and show the impact of the equilibrium price level and GDP of the fiscal policy. All right, so boom, that's what I just did right there. So we started off in a recession with a QE and a QY, price level E. Now we have a price level 1, and we're at our full employment. We definitely need to make sure that we label all of our axes for full points, and there we go. Based on the change in GDP identified in Part D, will the supply currency question? Ha! Foreign exchange, you're not on the test. You're gone. All right, F. Based on your answer to Part E, suck up. We're done. Let's go to 2016. 2016, and we'll start off with A. What's our prompt? Assume the United States economy is in a short-run equilibrium with the actual unemployment rate above the natural rate. Recession! Draw a single correctly labeled graph of the Phillips curve with a point P for a recession. Boom. So we have our inflation, we have unemployment, we have a short-run Phillips curve, we have our long-run Phillips curve. We're in a recession. Our unemployment rate is greater than our natural rate, which lives under our long-run Phillips curve. So that is our recessionary gap. Assuming no policy actions are taken, will the short-run Phillips curve shift to the right, shift to the left, or remain the same? All right, so this goes back to what we know about shifts in AS and AD. So if there's a shift in AS, it's going to be a shift in our short run Phillips curve. If there's a shift in AD, it's going to be a movement along the short run Phillips curve. So we're in a recession. We've talked about this multiple times now. You guys are starting to see the pattern of these problems. We're in a recession, right? AS is here, AD is here. I haven't had a job for a long time. I was making 100 grand, now I'm making 75. Aggregate supply is made up of resource prices, actions by government, and productivity. If resource prices fall, you don't have to pay me as much. You can supply more to market. Aggregate supply will increase. Aggregate supply increases, shifts us to the right. Inflation fell, employment grew. So in this case up here, inflation is going to increase. And since employment increased, unemployment decreased, we'd be a new point right there. Oh, I went reverse. Ha! Suckers. Sorry about that. So inflation decreased, and my unemployment is going to decrease because my employment increased. I was doing a typical Mr. Owen and going the wrong way and going dyslexic on you. Short run, Phillips curve. So what happened? We shifted to the left or down. What are my choices over here? All right, so left or downward. Is that B? Yep. B. Left or downward. Cool. So once again, remember, and keep those cheat sheets out for you on the day of the test. How will open market operate? How will the I skipped one. If the Federal Reserve Bank wants to lower unemployment, what expansionary open market operation will it use? Okay, so we're in a recession. Whenever you're in a recession, we need our expansionary monetary policy, which is RBLL. We want to reduce interest rates. That's the point of expansionary monetary policy. We do that by using our open market operations. We can buy bonds, we could lower the discount rate, or we could lower the reserve requirement. They just want to know what's going to happen to our open market operations. So we would buy bonds. Buy bonds is C. D. How will the open market operation you identified in Part C affect the following: the federal funds rate and the real interest rate in the short run? Okay, so the federal funds rate is the rate that banks borrow from each other overnight if they don't have the required reserves needed to satisfy the legal required reserve ratio. Now, if you're increasing the money supply by buying bonds, you're making the money supply bigger, right? When you buy bonds, your money supply increases, and that drives down the interest rate. That's our whole point. But by increasing the money supply, banks now have larger excess reserves, right? These reserves that are sitting in their bank. Now, those banks, they want to loan that to customers in the form of loans to collect interest, or they can loan that out to other banks at the end of the day if other banks need to borrow that money. Well, since there's a whole bunch more money, they're going to have a surplus of excess reserves. And whenever you have a surplus, you have to decrease the price. And in this case, the price is the interest rate. The federal funds rate is the price. So you have to decrease the federal funds rate. And my explanation would be banks have more money. To get rid of that extra money, they have to decrease their interest rate. Let's see how a wordsmith said it. D, 1 point is earned. Let's see. 1 point is earned for saying that federal funds rate will decrease and for explaining that the money supply will increase, which will increase reserves. And hey, okay, so I thought I was better on that one. What's going to happen to the real interest rate in the short run? Just decrease, right? We're decreasing our interest rates. And that takes us to E. E says, given your answer in part D2, what is the effect on real GDP in the short run? Explain. Well, so let's imagine that we were in a recession, right? So I think that's where we were, right? We started with a recession. If you're in a recession and interest rates go down, then consumers are going to borrow money to buy big ticket goods. And businesses are also going to borrow money. So C and I are both going to affect aggregate demand. It's going to increase or shift to the right. So AD to AD1, driving up our inflation and increasing our output or increasing our employment. Let's see what they want. What's going to happen to real GDP? Well, real GDP will grow. So E, GDP will increase. She's moving, but she's not sitting up. So we're chilling right now. Let's see. That was E. So F, trading partners. So that's a foreign exchange. They're both foreign exchanges. We're done. All right, next question. 2015. 2015. Number A. Did I say that? I did. I said number A in your face. All right, assume the United States economy is operating below full employment. Once again, we're in a recession. Draw a correctly labeled long-run aggregate supply, short-run aggregate supply, and label them all those cool things. Let's do it. So once again, price level, GDP, AS, whoa, that's an AD, AS, and long-run aggregate supply. This was Y1, PL1, and I think YF, yeah. Maybe just remake my PowerPoints next year to these YFs because it's what they're doing with all the new ones. Assume the Federal Reserve targets a new federal funds rate to reach full employment. Should the Federal Reserve target a higher or lower federal funds rate? So we know that when they increase the money supply, we're reducing the federal funds rate. We just talked about that on the last problem, right? So if we have an expansionary monetary policy, our expansionary monetary policy is going to increase our money supply. And so by increasing our money supply from MS1 to MS2, we're giving banks more excess reserves, right? More excess reserves means they're going to be dropping those federal funds rates, dropping the cost of borrowing money in the form of federal funds rate to entice banks to borrow money. So they need to target a lower federal funds rate. So lower federal funds rate. All right. C. Given the Federal Reserve action you identified in Part B, draw a correctly labeled graph of the. Yeah, I did that in my explanation. All right. So with that one, we're looking at right here. Let's just do it again. That way I slow it down. And this should be our nominal interest rate. This is our quantity of money. This is our money demand curve and money supply curve. We started here. Now we wanted to fix this recessionary gap. So to do that, we need to drop interest rates, right? Reduce interest rates, buy bonds, lower the discount rate, or lower the reserve requirement. So we're increasing the money supply to MS1, dropping our interest rates. Do they want me to label anything? No. Sweet. All right, that was C. That brings us to D. The policymakers pursue a fiscal policy rather than a monetary policy in Part B. Assume the marginal propensity to consume is 0.8 and the value of a recessionary gap is 300 billion. All right, let's get down to our equation, which was our total change in GDP equals our initial change times our multiplier, whether that's the spending multiplier or tax multiplier. We'll just call it the multiplier. Right now, they want us to mess with spending, okay? So let's see. If the government changes its spending without changing taxes to eliminate the recessionary gap, calculate the minimum required change in government spending. All right, so let's use the data we have right here to figure out what our multipliers are. That kid is definitely moving. All right, so quick. MPC is 0.8, which means my MPS is 0.2, My spending multiplier is 1 over my MPS. My spending multiplier is 5. My tax multiplier is my MPC over my MPS. 0.8 over 0.2 is 4. And the tax multiplier should be 1 less than our spending multiplier, so we're good there. We need to know a total change in GDP, so we need to solve for 300 billion and need to correct. We don't know the initial change, so question mark times our spending multiplier is 5. 300 divided by 5 is 60 billion. They need to increase spending by 60 billion to fix that recessionary gap. That is part I. Part I2 is if the government changes taxes without changing government spending to eliminate the recessionary gap, will the minimum required change in taxes be greater, smaller, or equal to the minimum change? It's going to have to be greater. They're going to have to cut more taxes because the spending multiplier is smaller, right? The spending multiplier is always 1 smaller. So if I do that same equation again, 300 equals my initial change times 4. Now I go with 300 divided by 4. They need to cut taxes by 75 billion or 75 million, whatever billion. So it's going to have to be greater. Your explanation is that the tax multiplier is less than the spending multiplier. The tax multiplier is solved by doing MPC over MPS, whereas the spending multiplier is 1 over MPS. All right, assume the government lowers income tax rates to eliminate the recessionary gap. Will each of the following increase, decrease, or stay the same? So if we cut taxes, aggregate demand is going to increase or shift to the right. Why? We have more disposable income. People are going to spend the money. What's going to happen to long-run aggregate supply and explain? This one you could answer any way you wanted, actually. I'm just going to read you their answers. Usually a long run stays the same, but I liked where they went with this one because this was a pretty creative answer. So you could say 1 point is stated at aggregate, blah, blah, blah. 1 point is earned for saying the long run will stay the same because lowering income taxes will increase consumer spending and or investment, and there's no change in inputs. So long-run aggregate supply is going to stay the same because we have more disposable income. Aggregate demand is just going to move to the right, and we've corrected it. But then you could also say 1 point is earned for saying that long run will increase because by lowering taxes, which they stated in the problem, that will increase savings, and that results in an increase in business investment. Therefore, like we did earlier, aggregate demand goes to the right in the short run, but because we've spent all that money on tools, aggregate supply shifts. So it looked like we're in a recession. Then aggregate demand increased, but we bought tools. So then aggregate supply increased, and now we're over here. So that works. Then you can also say that 1 point is earned that long-run aggregate supply will decrease in the long run because lowering taxes leads to crowding out of private investment. So they're saying, okay, since we cut taxes, our government ran a deficit. Therefore, we had to increase borrowing, raised interest rates, and then businesses are like, nah, not going to invest in my business anymore, and long aggregate supply shifts to the left. So either way you wanted to go on that one, you could have gotten it as long as you explained it. Baby is now sitting up. Let's move as fast as we can for 2014. Boom! All right, 2014, you versus me right now. A. Okay, assuming the United States economy is operating below full employment and GDP with a balanced budget. Draw a correctly labeled graph. Okay. Recession again. Seems like there's a pattern here. AS, AD, long run, GDP, price level, Y1, YF, PL1. All right. United States government increases spending on goods by 100 billion, which is financed by borrowing. How will the increase in government spending affect each of the following? Cyclical unemployment. So if we're in a recession, we're experiencing cyclical unemployment, right? If we're on the long run aggregate supply, we're just experiencing frictional unemployment and structural unemployment. Frictional is when you're in between two jobs. Structural is when your skills don't match up with the workforce and you're going back to be retrained and re-enter the workplace. Over here, you're experiencing cyclical. That's where you're in a recession, the economy is sick, so you're experiencing cyclical unemployment. If we if the government increases spending, that's going to move aggregate demand to the right. It's going to decrease cyclical unemployment because we're returning back to our long run equilibrium. What's it going to do to natural rate of unemployment? Like the three other FRQs we've seen out of five, nothing's going to happen to our natural rate of unemployment. Our natural rate of unemployment will remain the same. So let's call that a nada. That's a mother interacting with a baby in there. Yes! Now I can slow down. But at this point, I've accelerated to a point in which I can't slow down. If the marginal propensity to consume is 0.75, calculate the maximum possible change in real GDP that could result from a 100 billion increase in government spending. Break out the equation. The equation says, this is C. This was B. This is C. The equation says a total change in GDP equals our initial change times our multiplier. In this case, we are using spending, government spending multiplier. Our spending multiplier is 1 over our MPS. They said that our MPC is 0.75, which means our MPS is 0.25. Our spending multiplier is 1 over 0.25. Or 4. All right, so they spent 100 billion. So my initial change is 100 billion times 4. My total change in GDP will be $400 billion. Sweet. All right, D. Using a correctly labeled graph of the loanable funds market showed the effect of the $100 billion increase in government spending on the real interest rate. All right. Well, the government's used to borrowing money, so that's calculated initially in our equilibrium here. Supply, demand, real interest rate, quantity of loanable funds. This is where consumers borrow, businesses borrow, government borrows, and foreigners borrow. But the government had to borrow this 100 billion. So they've increased their government borrowing by $100 billion, increasing the demand for loanable funds and, ta-da, raising the interest rate. Boom. Based on the real interest rate in part D, what is the effect on the long run economic growth, and explain? Oh, we've seen this question now again in like 3 problems as well. So if there's a increase in interest rate, well, that means consumers are going to borrow less and spend less, and businesses are going to spend less, borrow less and spend less. We're talking about long run economic growth. So if businesses are spending less on their capital goods, our long run aggregate supply will decrease or shift to the left. So our long run economic growth rate will slow or decrease relative to where it started because investment spending on capital goods will stop as a result of the increased interest rates. Nice. And the last one, this one was a good little nugget of 2014, was F. I liked this one a lot. F said, now assume instead of financing the 100 billion increase in government spending by borrowing, the United States increases taxes by 100 billion. So they want to keep a balanced budget. They're increasing government spending, which is an expansionary fiscal policy, but they're also increasing taxes, which is a contractionary fiscal policy. You look at it and you go, oh, sweet. Well, those two are going to cancel each other out because you're increasing government spending by $100 billion. You're increasing your tax by $100 billion. This will create a balanced budget. But wait a minute, we forgot about our multipliers. the multipliers are always going to be different. Our spending multiplier will be higher than our tax multiplier. Why I chose 4? Don't know. Just did it. If our spending multiplier is 4, our tax multiplier is always going to be 3. They're always going to have a smaller tax multiplier than our spending multiplier. Why? Because when you're messing with aggregate demand, your initial government spending is going to increase aggregate demand by 100. And then that's supposed to be a C. Your initial government spending of increasing by $100 billion is going to count towards aggregate demand. And then after that, the spending based on your marginal propensity to consume is also going to increase. So each level is going to increase on the C. So spending multiplier is going to be like that. The tax multiplier, your initial cut in taxes isn't calculated in the GDP because you see your cut in taxes in your paycheck. So you save that chunk of money first, then you spend it. So that's why the spending multiplier is always higher, because the tax multiplier, your initial change, isn't registered in aggregate demand. So this one says, will the increase in government spending and taxes, with this equal increase in government spending and taxes, will the GDP increase, decrease, remain the same? GDP is still going to go up. GDP will increase because aggregate demand is going to go to the right, because the spending is still going to outweigh the taxes. So we are spending 100, taxing 100. So our budget is balanced, but because the spending multiplier is higher, it's going to come back. So there'll be a little change in there. Let's see how the wordsmiths handle that. 1 point is earned for explaining that expansionary policy will increase the government spending outweighs the contractionary effect of the increase in taxes. Boom. So one is larger than the other. So that was the assignment, the long FRQs. We'll try and get something else up. I don't really know what else to review with you guys. These are the FRQs. 5 of you are watching my videos. Thank you. The rest of you, good luck on your AP exam.